Part 1 of changing the brakes on an old blue Jimny. The brakes are in a sorry state. On our way back from the north of Scotland, this issue with stopping became rather noticeable. When travelling the traffic-calm streets of Edinburgh and later Newcastle, Jimbo's typically smooth braking turned into an unnerving lollopy lurch, providing our trip back with some rather arse-clenching situations. Now, back to what's unfolding before your eyes. After chocking the front wheels and doing whatever that is, to be extra certain the car wasn't going to move, I acquired the jack from the boot, found a suitable socket for the wheel nuts, and began cracking them loose. With the nuts moving freely, I jacked up the right wheel and removed it. Hurriedly, I shoved one axle stand under the radius arm before lowering the jack. After jumping around on my knuckles and toes, making thoughtful primate noises, I moved the stand under the axle. I figured, with my dizzying intellect, that there must be a reason why these things have axle attached to their name. Over on the flip side, I raised the wheel, removed the nuts, and settled the left side of the axle on a stand. And, annoyingly, had to stop for the day due to a torrential downpour. Hoisting around a soggy mop of ginger hair atop my head, I chucked everything in the back of Jim and called it a day. It's a new day, it's a new dawn, and I'm feeling mildly adequate. In a fit of splendid stubbornness, I dug around in the shed until I found an M8 bolt. After a spurt of MacGyverishness and profound stupidity, behind the scenes pending, I set to work getting the drums off. Thankfully, this is where the bolt comes in handy. There's 2 tapped holes on each rear drum that aid in getting them off. After some liberal squirts of WD-40 and some lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, the drums were away. Though this process wasn't as easy as one might think. I suffered a truly catastrophic injury that nearly resulted in the whole project being scuppered. With the drums off, the inner workings were exposed, and, to my surprise, there wasn't as much brake dust as one would expect to find. With a no-nonsense snatch of my old blue toolbox, I was ready to begin disassembling. First things first, the handbrake would need to be untensioned. The nut to do this is easily accessible by means of an extended 10mm socket situated towards the end of the handbrake lever. Note: making a mental tally of the amount of anti-clockwise turns you make will help greatly at the end of the assembly process. Next, set up a stool you'll barely use and do some gardening to pass the time and prevent any further injuries from occurring. Squatting instead of sitting, take a plethora of pictures to reference later. Then, down your photographic device and let the fun begin. To start with, I removed the little brackets and pins that hold the brake shoes in place. A simple procedure done by depressing the bracket and twisting the pin. Next, deliberate on how best one should go about removing the handbrake cable. Before ultimately deciding to remove the brake cylinder instead. To the time-conscious drip, drip of brake fluid trickling down my drive, I then removed the left brake adjuster spring and the lower one. Finally, I was able to remove the brake cylinder and place a blanking cap at the end of the brake line. And, as so often is the case with my optimistic maintenance projections, this whole job just got a whole lot longer. One of the brake pistons had seized. Ideally, I would have preferred to replace the brake cylinders with 2 new ones, and at a later date I likely will. But remember how I mentioned optimistic maintenance projections? Well, Jimbo's Ministry of Transport appointment was approximately 38 hours away, and so, in a sanitary working environment, I removed the unstuck piston and spring. Then I gently persuaded the seized piston to become unseized. Having taken everything apart, I then cleaned the slave cylinder and pistons as best as I could. After spraying half a can of brake clean and inhaling the other half, I applied some lubricant to the pistons and reassembled everything. Happy that the brake pistons were moving freely, I turned my attention back towards the brake shoes and the handbrake cable.
Cut it off. Yay.
After a very long and awkward amount of huffing and puffing, I eventually unhitched the cable from its plate. Lastly, I cleaned the back plate with a generous amount of brake clean while enjoying a solvent and brake dust induced high. Now would probably be a good time to encourage you, dear viewer, to please wear a mask while tampering with your brakes. Depending on the age of your car and its braking components, you might run the risk of exposing yourself to asbestos. So please, don't do as I have done here. Moving over to the other brake, I repeated this whole process again, though this time the brake pistons weren't seized and were working as they should. Upon further inspection of the removed parts, I found another seized component. The brake shoe tensioners wouldn't tension. Slightly disheartened and dreading the fact I might not meet my preconceived deadline, I packed up for the day and took the tensioners inside, where I prepared for them an exquisite bath of 1 part extra virgin olive oil and 1 part 100% natural sunflower oil, with a few optional squirts of Napolina olive oil. With the oil hopefully soaking its way into the threads, I left the tensioners to sit overnight. Thank you for watching part 1 of changing the brakes on an old blue Jimny. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing for future content. And join me next time for the second part of this whole brake debacle.